Now picture this. You found the perfect candidate. They did the first interview really super well. You're ready to schedule the second interview. And then silence, radio silence. You follow up, nothing. The candidate has vanished into absolute thin air. Now, what if I ask the question that it's not really about them, but it's about me, you, or the recruiting professional? What if the real issue isn't candidates being unprofessional, but a fundamental mismatch in cultural expectations you didn't even know existed? So, hello, my name is Tanja with TP Talks Working Global. Today, we're diving into one of the most frustrating challenges in global recruitment: ghosting, candidate ghosting. And I'm joined by Zoé de Geofroy, an HR leader with deep experience in recruiting across Switzerland and Canada, two markets that couldn't be more different in how candidates engage in the hiring process. So Zoe is right at the intersection of talent strategy and HR operations. She's right there in the front and center. She has spent over a decade navigating these complexities of multicultural hiring, helping global organizations build teams across borders. With firsthand experience in both hyper-competitive Swiss market and evolving Canadian landscape, she's seen how cultural blind spots can sidetrack even the most promising hiring processes. Today, she is here to help us understand what's really happening when candidates disappear and what global hiring managers, HR, and professionals need to do differently. Hello, Zoe, and welcome.
Hello, and thank you very much for having me today. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you.
Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule. Now, before we go dive into this fascinating topic that both you and I absolutely love, can you tell a little to us a little bit about yourself and how did you end up working across such different markets like Switzerland and Canada?
Of course. So basically, I've been working in HR for the past 10, almost 10 years now. I'm originally from Switzerland and also Canada. So I did all my studies in Canada, and my study started in by doing research on emotional intelligence and the impact of emotional intelligence on knowledge sharing in the workplace. Slowly but surely, I moved away from academia and landed in learning and development, which was very close to my studies. I joined. That's when I actually joined the international scene in Geneva, in Switzerland. I left Canada, joined the International Committee of the Red Cross, and then slowly but surely moved into recruitment. Fell in love with recruitment. I worked for a Swedish group. It was actually the Swiss branch of a Swedish recruitment agency that
Wow.
focused on recruitment of young professionals. I did that for almost 4 years, and then decided to go in house, actually in an HR generalist position. I worked for basically what was a bit of a branch of the World Health Organization, doing research on antibiotic resistance,
Mm.
and finally decided to move back to Canada in 2024. Quebec is really what the place that feels like home to me. So I moved back to Canada and joined InnoCap, a fintech, because I absolutely still love talent acquisition. I went for this position, which is a senior talent acquisition position, and that's how I've gained experience in recruitment, both in Europe and now in North America.
Wow, that's a mouthful. So you've been crossing the globe and hopping it back and
Right.
forth really a lot. How many languages have you used in that time span in getting the job done?
Yeah, so mostly French and English, but I also speak some Spanish, mostly for personal reasons. My dad lived in Spain for years,
All right.
so I spent a large number of summers there.
Nice.
And I also studied Italian in university, so actually worked in all four languages. I would say that now my Spanish and Italian are a bit rusty, but definitely French and English. Absolutely daily, because I would hire people not only in Switzerland but also Spain, the UK, India, Latin America, and then of course the US, Canada, and yeah. So it's pretty much it.
Fabulous, very interesting. So let's get down to business. Let's talk about the
Yeah,
ghosting, the what we're all kind of trying to figure out what's going
yeah,
on. You mentioned that in Switzerland, candidates
yeah.
rarely ghost, but in Canada,
Yeah.
especially Quebec, it may happen more often. Now, what's actually driving this difference? Is it cultural, generational? What is it?
hmm I think that the nature of the market is very different. The reality of the market is different. It hit me when I moved from Switzerland to Canada. I work for a fintech. What the kind of profiles we're looking for are very niche. But you can tell that there are people fight for talents in the Canadian market.
Right.
Whereas, when you're in Switzerland, Switzerland obviously attract a lot of people because of the very high salaries,
Right.
because it is central, because we are in within Schengen. So many people try and come to and try and come to work in Switzerland. So it's not surprising to end up with like 250, 300 applications on a roll, which is not the case in Quebec, in particular, in Canada in general. I would say that there are fewer people. So obviously in Switzerland, when you know that you're competing against maybe 200 or 250 people and you've managed to land the first interview, you're not going to ghost because you're already very grateful, very happy to have landed that very first interview. I would say that, the market is probably a bit more balanced here, and candidates have maybe other options as well. So they're usually involved in, other recruitment processes.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, you're telling me that in Switzerland it tends to be a lot more competitive. There's a lot more CVs. So
Absolutely.
in
Yes.
recruitment, you don't have to be like you have the choice.
You have
Whereas
a lot of choice. Yeah.
whereas in Canada, it's a lot of more. It's more. It moves faster, and people can
Absolutely.
job shop basically.
Absolutely. People have more of a choice. Candidates have more power. And the market moves fast. Companies need to move fast to really match market reality. Whereas in Switzerland, I think it's also part of the culture that, things move slower. Obviously, you'll notice, the notice periods are longer. It's usually 3 months when you
Right.
change jobs. So everything just takes more time. So people are used to that. And again, because there's so much competition, people are not shopping around that much, as you said. So it's a very good point. Yes.
Okay, so if you take the market in the Canadian
Yeah.
market where people are job shopping, and let's say they go to the first interview and then they ghost. I mean, how do you know, or how do you know, how do you prevent? What's the game plan here to try to minimize the ghosting and really retaining and attracting these people
Yeah.
um, into coming in and
Of
staying
course.
in the game?
Thank you. And no, it's a very good question. I think in Canada, it's all first of all being aware again that the market moves fast, which means that again, people are probably the candidate you're speaking to is probably involved in a different process. So you might want to, make sure that from the very beginning, you communicate a lot. You communicate about the process, you communicate about the next steps. You give information upfront so that candidates know what to expect.
Mhm.
Here, I feel that, communication and speed often signals respect. If candidates go on for 1 week or 2 weeks without, any kind of update related to their application, they usually think, okay, the company is not interested in me.
Oh,
So you
okay.
might want to over communicate and also keep them updated, keep them in the loop, to make sure that they know you're still interested. Keep them warm. Another thing is also maybe, sharing information about the company, selling the company, its culture. If you have, a good, having a good employer branding, sharing during that very first interview, what it's like, what a day on the job is like in the company,
Okay.
why it's nice to work for this company, so that people can actually, picture themselves and have a more of a chance of being hooked, basically.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what I'm hearing is that now in recruitment, it's not just, following a certain line, it's basically actually selling the job,
Yeah.
selling
Yeah.
the team, selling yourself as a manager or TA or recruiter. Basically, anybody in the company who's involved in the recruitment process is actually selling as much as possible and communicating
Yes.
to make sure to
Yes.
retain the talent that you need. Is that what I'm hearing?
It's absolutely correct. When I used to work in Switzerland, we would expect candidates to show up for an interview, to have done their background research, to know about the company, to know about our activities, to know about the other offices and everything. And, to sell themselves, they needed to self promote so that, we would maybe pick them. Because again, there were maybe 200 other candidates we could choose from.
Okay.
Here, I feel that the trend is a bit different. Although, again, it has readjusted, the past 2 years or so. It was worse, maybe in 2022. But basically, I would say, here it's more about, giving information, providing, giving visibility and selling the company. Absolutely. It's really this dual process, of course, of like, mutual self promotion, basically, the company and the candidate. But the company has to do it more than we would in Switzerland, for instance.
Okay, so everybody's on the bandwagon of trying to know
Yeah,
how to have these sales skills in attracting
absolutely.
and retaining talent for the long haul through
Oh,
the
yeah.
interview.
Marketing and HR teams are working hand in hand, really, to know how to really work on their employer branding, and really sell their image, market their image. Really, it is important, communicate what their company is about. Yeah.
Okay, oh, super interesting. So regardless the language that you're
Yeah.
using and regardless the candidate, whether it's in French or in English,
Yeah.
the process is going to be still that selling of the company culture, the employer branding and communicating and over communicating. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think it's going to make the difference. And I think you have to be aware also, coming from abroad or hiring people abroad in a different culture. Obviously, it's about adjusting your communication style as well. I've noticed at least, that in Switzerland, when I would hire people, I think processes are a bit more formal. The tone is more formal. Rigor is the key. People expect, again, processes, candidates expect processes that are longer. But basically being rigorous and, providing information and being thorough equals credibility. I would say that, here it's a bit less formal. People are more approachable. The tone is a bit different. So adjusting to your talent pool is important as well, in the way that you communicate and that you approach potential candidates. Yeah,
Right, because the market is also more volatile than it would be.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. Now, as we're heading into this part, into recruitment and be it recruiter, TA,
Yes.
manager, anybody nowadays, considering that employer brand is important, you can have anybody or everybody participate in it. What would be some
Absolutely.
big blind spots that have
Mhm.
been present that you know of that are reoccurring and that need that what's missing? What are the blind spots and what's missing when we're going across recruiting multicultural talent?
I think that the first thing, is being aware that, being aware of your biases is the first thing. We all have biases. When you're hiring abroad, when you're hiring locally or abroad, being aware of your biases, it's probably going to be even more obvious when you hire globally, right? So being aware of your biases, throughout the entire recruitment process, having like reality checks with yourself, is important. How those biases impact, the way you think, the way you will assess a candidate, and so on. Keeping in mind that different does not mean not a fit. sometimes people have a different communication style. They have a different leadership style, and maybe it is cultural related. Being aware that, it does not mean that, it's different, but it doesn't mean that it won't fit within your company. Being aware, maybe, that local experience is a major asset, of course, because you understand the ecosystem, you understand the market, the reality of the market, the challenges, whatever. Um, but if someone comes in with relevant experience in a similar position, similar industry, if not the same, give it a shot, give it a try. So maybe, sometimes maybe being more flexible about local experience. Being aware that self promotion does not mean the same thing everywhere. I
Mhm.
see it in
Interesting.
Switzerland. I think it's also inherited from our Protestant ancestors and, culture, right? In Switzerland, people are maybe, you are taught to be quite humble when you present yourself in an interview, modest in the way that you explain your skill set, whatever. I think that it seems much more aggressive to me in North America, and I'm absolutely impressed because I feel people are trained early on here to sell themselves and being their best advocate. And you have to be aware of that. Sometimes you can be a little surprised, but self promotion does not mean the same thing everywhere. um being silent during an interview, some people will take a couple of minutes to reflect, upon a question, think about the question that they've just been asked
Mhm.
before giving their best answer. Well, in some cultures, it could be seen as like, oh, well, suddenly they disengaged from the conversation,
Right.
but probably not in different culture, right? So I think being aware of that, adapting your interview style, your interviewing style, the way you interview people. It's I think it's a mix of all these things, that you have to keep in mind when especially when you're hiring people globally. Yeah.
So what I hear you saying is basically just the different ways of communication, be it direct or more modest,
Right.
is fine. Adapt accordingly.
Yeah.
And often this is and promote your skills is what I hear. Sell your
Right.
skills. In French, I think
Yes.
I always say "Frimez vos compétences,"
Yeah, it is true. It is true.
right?
And you learn to do that because it's not natural for everyone. It is hard and sometimes it feels countercultural. Literally, it feels
Right.
counter you go it's not the most, spontaneous thing you can do. It's not a natural thing. You have to learn to do it depending on how and where you were brought up and where you started your career, for instance. So, yeah, absolutely. That's right.
Now, often I hear, and this is a tough one because
Yeah.
sometimes I work with clients who are either startups or
Yeah.
a small family company. And one of the first things they do, they, let's say for lack of a better word, they kind of
Yeah.
prepare. But
Okay.
evidently, whether we try as hard as we can, it comes out. Cute accent, where are you from? Can you please say something about that? How do you handle that? Be it in Canada, interviewing,
Oof.
and in Switzerland. How is this something
That's
that you deal as well with? And how do you go around this to train your hiring professionals in being conscious of this bias and maybe siding it with something else? If you
oh, it's a
can,
very good question. So you mean in an interview, if interviewers ask that, basically,
right?
it's interesting because I have two completely different experiences. I'm sorry to say so, but Switzerland is so politically incorrect, and it hit me when I moved here, because I think people are way more aware of that here, and I find that fantastic in Canada. How you know. You are way more cautious about, asking questions like this one. It shocks me now. It really shocks me
Uh-huh.
when people ask that. I think that, it's something that I, I would tell you, back in Switzerland, it would have been like, oh well, I'm not surprised. It doesn't sound right, but it won't surprise me. I feel that, as you said, I think it all boils down to biases, and it's something that, as you step into a recruitment process, you should always be aware of it. You should think about it. You should, you should kind of like it's a reality check with yourself, being like, okay, I'm going to interview this person and I'm going to try and be as neutral as possible and think about the company, think about the culture in general, and would the person fit? What can the person bring? Because they're different as well. And it's great. Difference is wonderful. Being aware of it, and be as neutral and as open as possible. I think that that's it.
Mhm.
And I think, for candidates, this is a question that they're allowed not to answer, and I think it says a lot about a company. If a company asks you this question,
Mhm.
I would have some concerns at this point, depending on where you are, especially in North America. I would have some concerns because it does not say anything about the person's fit within the company, or about the person's ability to perform in their
Mhm.
future position. Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, I know you also have certain laws that are in place that permit you to
absolutely.
not say it and also risk the fact that the candidate may come and go into
Of course,
court
if
and
they're disqualified, they can blame that, and that they shared that piece of information and they were disqualified for that reason. So, it's something that everyone has to be aware of. Absolutely.
Mhm. So these biases and communicating differently, with my
Yes.
clients, this can be a real challenge. And like you said a couple
Yeah.
minutes ago, it can actually be painful. You're like in this
Yeah.
discomfort zone until you
Yeah.
get there, and you have to practice it because for just
Yeah.
having biases present in an interview can really unattract or just pull people away. And of course, we're back to ghosting. So
Sure.
in your experience in recruitment, what would be some benchmarks or good practices to do? And I know training is important,
Hmm.
but a lot of
Yeah.
my clients say, "Oh, it's too expensive," or "I don't have time." What would be some
Yeah.
good practices that can happen, not just individually, but within the team inside the company, where they could practice and diminish that want of biasing or asking the famous question, "A nice accent, where you
Yeah.
from?" What do you
It is
suggest?
true. No, it's a very good point. I think that, just within one's team, you can literally just sit together and have this open discussion. I think that's great when you work with a team that you trust, and that you can basically just, you can step into your manager's office or colleague's office and be like, look, I need to sort of like speak about that, talk about that with someone. I need to empty my mind, and like, I'm aware that I might be biased right now. I need to talk about it with someone. I think that having that trust, that trust within your team, and that team culture where, like, it's open, and you can express things without being judged. It's the first thing. So you can sit with your team, and maybe you can have like regular checkups. I don't know how much, how busy you are and so on, but let's say you could have like a monthly meeting or quarterly meeting about, biases, as in, let's sit together and discuss potential biases we've had this past, few months, and something that we've learned from it, and like, how can we work around those biases? What do they say about us? What Because again, we will never get rid of all these biases. It's about what we do with them. How aware are we that we have biases, and it's wonderful when you have, like, really, my CPO told me recently, she's like, I'm aware we all have biases, and no one will blame you for having biases as well. The question is, what do you do with them? Are you aware of them, and
Mm,
how do they impact your work, basically? So having this team where you can trust everyone, not feel judged, and discuss biases and challenge each other. Why do you feel this way, and what about this biases? Where does it come from? And I think that helps a lot because you have those reality checks sometimes, and,
mm,
and it
that's great advice. Now, how would imagining that you're giving this advice back in Switzerland in a
yeah,
conservative
yeah.
environment? What could be something that could be implemented within that environment that where the person
Mhm.
still feels comfortable, but yet not, and feels it without feeling bad and counterproductive in their daily recruitment
Yeah.
tasks?
I think that as HR in general, I mean, we can try and train people, well, train ourselves, train other HRs, and then train hiring managers, because I think it's throughout the entire recruitment process. So of course,
Right.
like, we can work on it ourselves, but then, training your hiring managers to be aware of that really helps, helping them, coming up with templates with, acceptable questions and questions they should not be asking,
Correct.
explaining to them what kind of biases exist out there, and what it means in the frame of a recruitment process, giving them tips of how to conduct interviews, leaving biases at the door. I think it's about that. It's about, you know playing acting as a really as a trusted advisor for hiring managers throughout the entire recruitment process, so that candidates have the best experience,
Oh, that's
in that
very
sense.
sound. That's very sound advice. I spoke recently. I was at an expo recently in Paris, and
Yeah.
I spoke to some companies where that was really an issue. And what they've, not all of them, but I think it was one HR. She said that that was really an issue. So internally, they started taking a training and started talking. But what they also did, and I found that really interesting,
Hmm.
is they first of all they made their whole recruitment process very visible from beginning to the end, including exit interviews. And at
Hmm.
any time, basically after the recruitment, they ask at each point. I think they have identified certain milestones. I don't remember exactly at one point, but at 2 points in the recruitment per role,
Yeah.
especially people who have passed first, second, or third interviews, they send
Mm.
a questionnaire back.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
So I just wanted to share here for those of you who are interesting or
That
interested
is
by what
very
to do,
interesting.
to get also outside
Yeah.
feedback, because often when we're like, it's like driving
Right.
in your car. You're driving and you're always going from point A to point B, from your
Agreed.
home to your office when the day is that you work in your office, and you know exactly the way, but in your mind you're like an automatic pilot. And I think these blind spots exist in us, where the biases, like you
Yeah.
said, we may have
Yeah.
them, if they stay within us and they don't come out, or we don't talk about it, or they're not visible
Yeah.
to the naked eye, or to others, how do we deal with it? And I found at least this was an interesting solution and very risque, because I thought,
Mhm.
what if they got to lose? But the HR said, we've got everything to gain and nothing to lose. And
Yeah.
so I found that interesting. And I just wanted to ask you, what do you
And
think?
it is very brave, because many people will say conducting an assessment of the recruitment process, asking candidates, what did you think about the recruitment process, especially candidates who were let go. um Obviously, we can you can approach this and think, well, obviously they will be biased because they were disqualified. So it is very brave. I think it is, but it's also very smart. I think that if you actually care about candidates experience throughout the entire recruitment process, of course, what many companies do is that they ask new, like, recent employees, tell me about your experience with the recruitment and onboarding processes. But what could be interesting, of course, is to ask people who are not hired for the positions they've applied for, right? And I think you will get this 360 global, like, feedback, basically,
Mhm.
which is much more relevant, because you put all those things in place, as you said, to improve candidates experience. But at the end of the day, what are your KPIs, like,
Right?
how do you know if it actually, if it works? So I
Exactly.
think it is really good, as long as you maybe also keep in mind that obviously people might be a little biased themselves because they have been disqualified, right? So I think but it is still, there's still value to it.
Mm.
So it is and I think the idea of having also the privilege of doing exit interviews is great, because I think many companies would like to do that. As in, already giving proper feedback to candidates that have not been qualified. It sounds like the bare minimum, but sometimes managers don't give the information you need to give proper feedback. Sometimes your workload is crazy, so you don't have the chance to get proper feedback, and you feel bad as an HR. You
Right.
push for it, but I think that's the beginning. Getting back to candidates with a proper answer, are you moving forward, you're not, and then giving them, like, you know constructive feedback, that's fantastic. And on top of that, trying to have, like, exit interviews with candidates who were not selected, I mean, that's that's amazing, right? If you can afford to do it in terms of time, money, resources, and then it's wonderful.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and it could be as simple as just simply sending a little video, like we send on
Yeah.
WhatsApp, a little
Yeah.
message. Hey, mom, how you doing? We do that
You're
for our
right.
family.
You're right.
Why not extend
Absolutely.
that into the professional realm? Of course, being professional about it and focusing on the skills and not the biases, because we know
Right.
very well that big companies like IKEA, H&M, I can name a bunch of them, it's focusing on skills and not the
Yeah.
culture or where the person comes from, right?
You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. Yeah.
So, gosh, we've talked a lot, we've covered a lot of stuff. After saying all of this, what would be like one or two things, like a takeaway that
Hmm.
hiring professionals that are listening to this saying, "Okay, Zoe, okay, Tanya, what is one or two things that I can apply tomorrow or right away?"
Hmm. I would say adjust to market reality. That's the first thing. Understanding the market reality of where you work and where you are is key because that's where it all starts from. It unfolds from that point. Um, and also the other thing is, treat candidates with respect. They're entitled to an answer and they're entitled to as much visibility as possible. Give them information upfront. I know that, again, in some cultures, people will not feel comfortable asking for an update as much as they would elsewhere. So, try and give them visibility, a timeline, next step, timeline, deadline. Think of yourself as a candidate. You would sometimes, it happened to all of us. You leave an interview and you're like, oh, it was amazing. I love the company. I love the interviewer. And then maybe your partner or friend goes, okay, so what's the next step? And you're like, oh my God, I actually forgot. Like I asked a million questions, but I forgot to ask that one question and the person didn't tell me. And then you feel silly because you're left wondering, so when should I follow up? And when should I ask for an update? And you don't want to seem too pushy or desperate, but you also want to show that you're interested. So I would say, put yourself in the candidate's shoes. And it's always nice to know, what's next and what to expect. So I think that's it. Give people as much visibility as they deserve upfront, I would say.
Mm. Very sound advice, and absolutely, because when that is absent, the rumor mill starts, right? And we don't want rumor mill
Absolutely.
because it goes on the web and then
Yeah,
it tarnishes the image of the company, and sooner or later that just it's not it's
yeah,
productive, right?
that's absolutely right. Sometimes companies take longer, sometimes processes stall for whatever reason. It's
Right.
okay. You can be transparent about it. People will always prefer that from having no news, basically. So yeah, that would be my last piece of advice.
Very, very sound advice. Don't leave your candidates in the dark. Communicate and
Exactly.
communicate. Great. Well, I think we can go on with this conversation until for many, many more hours.
Yeah.
But to close it all in, where can people connect with you to learn more about your work in global HR and talent transition?
I am always reachable on LinkedIn anytime. My
Okay.
pleasure.
Okay. Zoe, thank you so much for
Thank you.
pulling back the curtain on what's really happening when candidates ghost. You've shown us that it's not about unprofessional candidates, but it's about cultural intelligence, the way we communicate, and understanding that the recruitment is not a one size fit all shoe, right?
That's right.
And
Thank you
you've
so
given our
much.
listeners, our followers, a new lens to view their hiring challenges and practical ways to bridge these cultural gaps before the best talent slips away. To our listeners and followers, if you're globally hiring manager or recruiter and frustrated by candidate ghosting, or an HR leader trying to build truly inclusive recruitment processes, these insights you've heard today are your roadmap. And do connect with Zoe here on LinkedIn. And thank you for joining us on TP Talks Working Global. I hope you've discovered at least one little golden nugget to transform on how you think about global recruitment. Keep following for more conversations that keep you navigating work across cultures. Well, until next time, keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for the stars. Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you. Bye, Tanya.